architecture was one field that we felt we really could, take real value in terms of working on not only problem solving in many different areas, not just buildings, but planning and so forth.
Is your head spinning too?
Hi, I'm Bill Sharples. The practice. Well, we all came into architecture, the founding principles all came into architecture kind of in their late 20s, early 30s. We actually were in other fields. I worked as a structural engineer in the 80s. Some of the partners in finance, marketing, political science, and art history. And we were all gravitated towards design. And I think in our previous experiences, it really gave me a perspective in terms of how I felt the future office could begin to execute work. With Gregg, it was kind of on the financial development side. Chris, political science, fine arts, and Corie, kind of on the marketing financing side. So we kind of all came together with different perspectives on design and approach, which for us was really what was really important. You really don't want for people who are going to approach the problem the same way. You want them to approach it differently.
First saw you.
So here at SHoP, we really think of design in a holistic way. We don't think about it as sort of architecture and interior design as separate departments. We do think about areas of expertise. So certainly there's people who have expertise in facades and people who have expertise in interiors or in furnishing and millwork and so on. But we really think of it all as design. So you can experience a building, from the outside as an object, or think about how you approach it on the street. When you come inside the building, that changes, right? That perception goes from thinking about it as object to thinking about it as experience. So there are different approaches and different kind of work methodologies when you switch from thinking of the object on the skyline to the way that an experience unfolds. But it's all design.
Should I stop, or are you falling for me? Is your world stop spinning? Is your head spinning too?
Sometimes a material is actually what sparks the whole concept when we're thinking. My favorite space in this entire office is the materials library. I could just spend all day sort of rummaging through the bins, and I might find a particular piece of stone or a beautiful tile that just starts a story going in my head, and I start to build an idea around that. We have a wonderful materials librarian who's really a research specialist, and she's always finding new things and putting them out in displays, curated with what they might go with, or some, inspirational concept images, just so that when people walk through the materials library, their eye will catch something and they might be inspired.
Is your head spinning too?
Interiors was once a holistic part of the architecture. There was no difference. It really came out of the guilds, right? So you had art and the decorative arts that were part of the architecture and formed the architecture. But things were also done over a much longer period of time then. So now everything is very specialized, everything's done on a very fast timeline, and so I think we start to have a divorce between architecture, core and shell, interior, decorative arts. I like to try and pull all those things back together, informing the design.
The background of the staff is predominantly architects, but we have people in the field from physics to economics to biology to philosophy to English. And bringing these various backgrounds in, it really creates this kind of cultural think tank. It's more about problem solving on a level of idea of performance, which for us, the airplane is probably the epitome of this. But the planes that are in our main lobby really reflect kind of the thought process in which we approach a design problem. These aircraft all over a 80-year period all fly, but the performance envelopes are very distinct as a result. They're very different. We feel that same way about architecture. It's not about a stylistic approach. It's about how a building performs, how an architecture performs. And ultimately, when you look at all the projects within the gallery, they're all very different. But they all kind of share the same approach in terms of how we approach the process of problem solving.
On Pier 17 in the South Street Seaport, we had a large pier on the East River that sat in front of one of the most historic districts of New York City. It's right where the city started. And so there was this great challenge of working within a very low height limit with a lot of infrastructure moving through the area, but with very little connectivity from the upland part of the city out to the water.
Should I stop or are you falling for me? Is your world start spinning? Is your head spinning too?
We felt that this was a unique opportunity to put mixed use office space, entertainment space, restaurant space, public park space, all together in a single building. We put a large 60,000-foot flat roof on the top, so it became a public park on the roof of the building.
Is your head spinning too?
Most interesting challenges was reconnecting the pier back to the street grid. So the first 2 floors of pier become this very open sort of street network-like space.
And I think the other challenge then was also that it's on the waterfront. And so in order to make it a neighborhood that was vibrant 12 months out of the year, we had to come up with a clever solution to make sure that you still felt like you were outside and in the authentic streets of the city, but with these large glass pier doors, you could block the wind coming off of the Atlantic Ocean and up the harbor. And so by bringing all of these ideas together, I think we've created a place that will be vibrant, authentic and alive 365 days a year. Today, they're a kind of place of mixture of different people and ideas and foods and cultures on the waterfront. And it's that vibrancy that we think will make it a successful space for the whole city.
And it's not very dissimilar from what it historically was. It was sort of this mixing bowl of innovation and history and technology sort of coming from the ships and into New York. So it's sort of like bringing back that idea in the 21st century.
The final part is bringing people access to the water, because the people of New York were always cut off from the water because of infrastructure, highways, these piers, sheds, industrial elements. But now that we don't need those to run the city anymore, we can kind of appropriate some of those forms to give people access to the waterfront that they've never had before. So bringing those 3 things together, I think, are all taken from New York's history, but show it in a 21st century way.
There's something beautiful sometimes about the streets of New York, how they frame certain buildings or certain piers. And I think that what we tried at Pier 17 is actually framing the piers, the pillars of the Brooklyn Bridge. So as you're walking down those streets, being able to see at the edge sort of like this beautiful image of what New York really is. I think that was something that we incorporated in design when looking at the street grid.
First saw you.
It'll be one of the few places in the city where you can wander streets and see water at the edge of every view portal. So you're surrounded on 3 sides by the water, but you're still in a kind of urban network. And that doesn't really exist anywhere in the city.
And if you're on the roof of Pier 17, you can see the Statue of Liberty, Empire State Building, the bridges, Brooklyn Bridge and Manhattan Bridge, like all in the same place, which is sort of unique and fantastic.
saw Veterans Coliseum was an interesting project to come into the office. It actually came right after we'd finished the Barclays Arena in Brooklyn. A lot of the same processes, which John and I worked on together, was to understand how we could actually manufacture a good portion of the whole envelope, well, in this case, the whole envelope of the building, and actually install it in a very short period of time. In a way, it is another example of a project where we looked at modular construction. And so we're using software here that the aerospace industry uses. And so it's a real seamless relationship between the designers and the makers. And the platform, the software platform, allows for that level of collaboration.
Everyone operates at a very high level of their sort of digital craft. So communication between design and manufacturer is completely seamless and very minimal.
By using these shared platforms, these shared digital platforms, we can work much more collaboratively. And the visualization is in real time. And we can also, as a result, we could virtually prototype everything and try, in a better way, catch where the problems might be. All these things could be virtually prototyped before you actually build it.
So when you digitize everything, you can overlay the highly controlled fabricated elements, the manufactured pieces, to the existing conditions that are, can be sort of wonky or out of place, and you can create or tailor the manufactured pieces to this sort of bespoke solution. And when you do that, there's, to say there's no surprises. In this case, there were really no surprises, but you have the answers immediately, and you're able to make very precise and accurate decisions. That's the challenge of construction.
It makes the process a bit more fun. Yeah, it makes because the fact is, whenever there's a problem and you don't have an answer, it creates some issues. But here we can actually sort of simulate what the problems could be and project what those answers could be. So this is the new Uber headquarters that's going to be in Mission Bay, San Francisco. It's a very exciting project because, working in San Francisco is quite different from New York, just in terms of the climate. How could we take advantage of that climate? The other thing that we thought was really important is that Uber's all about connectivity, about getting you from one point to another point. And at the same time, you can actually see where you are, where you're going. How could we create that, not only the sense of community, but that sense of connectivity? What if you were able to walk everywhere in this building without having to get on an elevator? So we created this idea of what we call the vertical commons, where you would actually walk out of your office space, out of the workroom, into this shared porch or this shared commons. We align that concept of the vertical commons along the whole facade of the two buildings. So literally, when you're walking by this building, you can actually see people who are working at Uber actually moving around and actually working in this sort of shared environment. So we looked at how we could actually design the facade so it would be a breathing facade, this very transparent facade where you can see everybody inside, sort of this community of workers. At the same time, how that whole facade opens up to the outside and takes advantage of the San Francisco climate. So the idea is that we're trying to open the building at the ground level to the community. And this was something that was really important to them, that it didn't feel like another corporate headquarters just landing down in their neighborhood, but trying to look at how we could create a sort of a shared experience. Other than executing full-fledged projects in office, one of the ways we test out our ideas or research and development is on what we call these kind of smaller ideas, these pavilions or follies. And our first one was PS1, MoMA, back in 2000. The most recent one, Wave Cave, which we did for Milan, the Design Week in Milan in 2017, is this terracotta structure, which we call Wave Cave. You can inhabit it when it's inverted as a space, and then when it's a cave, you actually enter into it. When you look at the imagery and the design, it's this idea of how it reflects light when it's in its inverted condition and wave, and how light comes down through the space when it's inverted. And the idea here was to come up with a die that would allow these terracotta blocks to lock, but also to create lacework in which light could permeate down through the elements, and also develop a system in which it would be self-supporting structurally. The projects like, as I said, the idea of Flopsum and Jetsum, or a Wave Cave, or the camera, or PS1, it's taking these ideas of how things go together, how they break down to scale, and translating them to this mega scale. Barclays Arena is an arena. You know, like any arena, it has a very specific performance requirement. In this case, 18,000 seats. And no parking. So it was a real challenge in terms of creating this, you know, iconic structure right in the middle of downtown Brooklyn.
Time stops when I'm falling for.
The other aspect was that the form itself also had to have this kind of civicness to it, that it was not turning its back on the neighborhood, but it is actually inviting the neighborhood in. And really, at the end of the day, it was down to like, how do we take a building of this scale and break it down so it has this relationship to the pedestrian?
There were a lot of these very hard metrics that we had to hit. It was designed as this, obviously, a sort of continuous, fluid, what we call the flocking pattern, but then the technical challenge of overlaying that and unitizing it and producing it in a prefabricated mentality. So there's a lot of technical constraints that disappear when done correctly.
Our heads spinning too.
It gives us a lot of confidence when we go in front of a client who says, well, you've never designed an arena before. Well, every project in this office we've never designed before. I mean, from towers to an arena to a carousel house. They all follow kind of the same process for us. And ultimately for us, it's all about the making. And the making informs us what the design, the material, and the beauty, and how that evolves as we take it from the sketch all the way to the site and the actual structure in the ground.
Yeah. that seemed to read in the neighborhood too. You know, on site through the construction, one, it's a very constrained site. It's an active, obviously, public downtown. Both the kind of construction team and the design team working collaboratively to understand, you know, the prefabricated nature of this, the just-in-time delivery of the components that a lot of the times sort of being picked directly off the trucks that they were brought from. Every day, the more and more it was assembled as it went around, the community engagement, you know, the reaction from people walking by really kind of infectious. Like people were really excited about it. We got some comments from some people about, oh, when are you going to paint it?
Is your head spinning too?
What's always great is when people name things and they start giving it names. The one we like the most is the angry clam. That's what it's called. But when people relate to architecture that way, we feel now they're personalizing it. Perfect example, Milan is surrounded by this beautiful terracotta, hundreds and hundreds of years. It looks beautiful, and that's the way we feel about our buildings, is that the material and how it's executed, how it goes together, is that it doesn't last for 10 years, it lasts for hundreds of years and will always look beautiful. So, you know, I think there was a hunger to bring a sports franchise back, but at the same time, bring it back on terms of what Brooklyn reflected, not try and bring in like this shiny structure that came from another city or another style, but something that was of Brooklyn. And that really came down to creating an iconic form that really engaged the pedestrian.
Is your world stop spinning?
We really wanted to make a building that took from the DNA of New York City. We didn't want it to be a building that could have been in Abu Dhabi or Hong Kong or London. We wanted something that was very particularly New York. This is 111 West 57th Street, which is a new skyscraper being built here in Midtown Manhattan. The building takes a historic building, which was called Steinway Hall, where Steinway pianos were sold for more than a century. And it assembled all the air rights from the entire block and placed them into a new, very slender, tall tower over the landmark building. At the end, it creates a building that is 1,428 feet tall, but only 60 feet wide. As you can see here, it will make it the most slender building in the world when it is done. The facade is made of this beautiful terracotta that twists and folds as it goes up, and each pilaster of the building is a setback to make this kind of beautiful arc setback on the building as a whole. And then between these pilasters are bronze filigree that create this texture and play of light and shadow on the facade. So it's these very traditional materials of bronze and terracotta, but used in an extremely contemporary way. I think on 111 West 57th Street, we took inspiration from many different fields. We had to look at storytelling, because just to get a building like this approved on top of a landmark building, we needed to get a lot of people behind it. We had to look at technology. As the most slender building in the world, the structural systems and the mechanical systems really were challenged and pushed to their limits to make this building functional. We looked at art. We looked at craftsmanship. We looked at digital technology. So it was really SHoP is the architects, but there were many people that came together to create and forge this idea. We could have built the building next door to the historic building, but in fact, that would have damaged the historic building more than building on top of it. which is contrary to what one would normally think. So we came up with a strategy for building the building on top, but I think the most important thing is the massing of the building, the slenderness, but the use of the setbacks in this kind of feathered arc that created the profile, and then the use of these historic materials, using technology to take these historic materials and fabricate and install them in a way that had never been done before. And I think what the result is, and this really came from SHoP, was a building that's remarkably tall and slender and clearly very contemporary, but yet has a lot of the history of New York embedded in it and has a kind of elegance that I don't think we're seeing in many skyscrapers around the world.
Very important that we are engaged. We are out in the studio, walking around, engaging everyone every day. There are events we do with this Q&A where we sit down, we take questions from the staff, and so it becomes a very much of a, engagement where the culture kind of understands, well, ultimately, what is the big picture? What is SHoP? Where's SHoP going? Is SHoP going to grow? Is SHoP going to stay the same? What kind of projects are we interested in? What did work? These are things that we like getting questions about. And for us, this is a way in which we're more and more in tune with our staff as well as our staff with us. The other aspects we try to do is bring in artists and engineers into the office, and we do these tech talks and these lunch talks again. And then of course we do events throughout the year where we get off-site and have some fun.
I'll start, all right?
Yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
Glad. You want to do that? Want me to do it?
You do it.
Good? Excellent.
Great. Thank you.
There's a commitment.